It's been ugly ever since Vinnie Pasquantino went down with an injury. Can the Royals survive the final 20-ish games? We'll dive into it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, it's been a long time since we've had the chance to do one of these podcasts, and I was out of town, didn't really have a chance to watch all the Houston series. As you probably could tell by my Twitter page, I wasn't as active as usual, but in the end, it worked out well for me because that was the worst series the Royals had played all season long. I believe worse than the Rangers series, just because nothing went right and a lot of injuries happened, and it bled into Monday as the Royals lost Game 1 to Cleveland. They are an extraordinarily banged-up team right now. I thought it was also just fitting that the one weekend that I'm gone and really inactive on all platforms, aside from a couple of times during the afternoon, they pick up 3 players in Tommy Pham, Robbie Grossman, and then Yuli Gurriel, who left with an injury yesterday. Little tightness at his hamstring, though the Royals believe, or at least Paul Hoover said, day-to-day with that hamstring injury or that hamstring tightness. And he was dealing with an hamstring injury when he was in AAA Gwinnett down in the Atlanta Braves organization before the Royals had traded for him over the weekend on Saturday. So lots to get into. Like I said, it's been since Thursday, really, because I had to record 2 podcasts. I was leaving very early on Friday, so we didn't get the chance to break down the Vinnie injury. We'll dive into that in the second episode or second segment today. Then in the third episode, we'll be able to really wrap everything up. But let's just get a breakdown of what all has happened in the last 6 games or so. And the Royals in the middle of their longest losing streak of the year. They get swept in Houston. Offense wasn't there, and it's not really a surprise the offense wasn't there because one of their RBI leaders in Vinnie Pasquantino, one of their best hitters with runners in scoring position, breaks his thumb, and it's doubtful at this point we'll see Vinnie Pasquantino again. I understand that he's optimistic. I would like to be optimistic, but the timeline and him returning to full strength matches up in like the American League Championship Series. And I know for a lot of Royals fans out there, you're not even worrying about the ALCS at that point. And that should be the focus. Focus should be you're not worrying about a couple series down the road in the postseason. It's about getting in at this point. And the Royals, of course, have been weak offensively. The rotation has suffered a blow in losing Michael Lorenzen for an extended period of time. They have had some guys not pitch well this week. Cole Reagans was lights out through 5 innings on Saturday, but the reality was the offense wasn't good enough for him to continue pitching like that. And he gives up 5 runs in the 6th inning, and that was that. Michael Walker yesterday was good enough through 5. Offense didn't give him enough. Brady Singer was really good in Game 1 of that Houston series. Wheels fell off because the offense didn't give him anything until a Kyle Isbell bases clearing double. And then Lucas Erceg blew the game in that fateful night where he tries to field a ground ball with his hand, throws it away, injures Vinnie Pasquantino, injures himself. Both of them leave the game. I can't think of another dramatic and devastating single play the Royals have had in a long time than that one. Losing your best bullpen arm and one of your best offensive threats in a matter of seconds. And you just think if he lets his hand go, he just drops the hand. It's a double play ball. Royals are out of it. They need 3 more outs, and they maybe can, put themselves a half a game back at first place. Now they're 4.5 back. And I hate to be the one to tell you, the focus cannot be the division right now, even with Cleveland in town, because you can't win the division even by taking the final 2 games. The fact of the matter is right now, they got to end this losing streak. And they got to make sure they can keep their head above water. They can survive for the final 22, 23 games here. And the positive, which we'll talk about in the final segment today, is that nobody else is really going for the kill shot. I look at the Royals right now like a wounded animal. They are bleeding in the wild. They are bleeding and they're in the woods and it's dark out and it's cold and they've got these coyotes. They've got these wolves, whatever you want to call them, chasing after them, but they don't have a scent on the wounded animal. They're not really that close to the wounded animal. And there is a clearing in the path, to give you this beautiful analogy, disturbing, but still, I think, necessary for what we're talking about. There's a clearing at the end of this, and the wounded animal can get out of there here in 3 weeks. They can escape and get into the opening. They can get to safety, and they can be fine. And all those teams, all those wolves chasing them, would not be able to get them when it was all said and done. And last night was another opportunity for those teams to gain some ground, to get some traction, to pick up a scent on the wounded animal. But the Royals just keep limping away. They are bleeding into the snow. They're in a 6-game losing streak, metaphorically and physically. They can't stay healthy right now. They're losing guys left and right. And I understand that right now it's doom and gloom. There was a lot of doom and gloom on Thursday. There was a lot of doom and gloom on Friday when Jose Altuve walked off the Royals. You know, it's that feeling of dread of I'm starting to panic a little bit. But there is a reason, as if you've watched me do this podcast all season long, I'm not going to get into a mode of panic until I am given a definitive reason to panic. And that to me would be actually losing a playoff spot here in the final 22, 23 games. Now, if the Royals wake up on Saturday and they hold a lead by a half a game because this losing streak continues into that series against Minnesota, I'm going to be panicking a little bit because at that point, the gap had been closed. But this 6-game losing streak was something we all dreaded. We all feared all season long. When is that downfall going to happen? Now, I think when you're looking at such a negative situation, losing Vinnie Pasquantino, losing Michael Lorenzen, maybe losing Yuli Gurriel, who just joined the team, losing Lucas Erceg for maybe a few games here and there, though they really didn't need to use him in the Houston series after Thursday, or they could have used him on Friday night because they had to go to James MacArthur in that situation after Paul DeJong had tied the game. But guys are getting hurt left and right. The positive is time is running out. And we'll talk about that in the third segment. But to me, this has been that period that everybody's dreaded of what happens when the Royals bottom out a little bit. The reality is at this point is the other teams that have had their opportunity have failed at gaining some ground, because you would like to think, even with the injuries, even with all these struggles, the Royals aren't going to lose 15 in a row. I'll knock on wood. I don't want to jinx anything here because the Royals aren't playing good baseball right now. But the gauntlet's almost over. They've got 2 more against Cleveland, 3 against the Twins, and 3 against the Yankees. So maybe not really close to being over, but they're over the halfway point now. Now they're 4-7 through those 11 games. They've got 9 to go here, or what would that be? Is that 8 to go of this gauntlet? And they haven't played well now for the last 6 games. And I think there's a direct correlation when you look to Vinnie Pasquantino's injury. It wasn't just the RBI count, right? It wasn't just the RBI total. This was a guy that was one of the leaders in the clubhouse. And yeah, he's still in there. He's still able to talk to the teammates and to the coaching staff and to be around. It's just different, though, when you're not actually playing. When you're not playing, it can really leave an impact on this team not having you out there. I mean, the Royals had Yuli Gurriel playing first base yesterday. He joined the team on Saturday. It is going to be a scratching and clawing type of effort all the way up until the final week of the season. I had changed my answer a few times, and I apologize for doing so. But I thought maybe the final week of the season was going to dictate the winner of the American League Central, and I wasn't really worried at that point about a playoff spot. Now you do have to a little bit, even though it's almost a 5-game lead. It's just that the Royals aren't playing good baseball, but fortunately for them, neither is Boston, neither is Seattle. Detroit is playing well, but they have to go on an absolute tear here over the final 3 weeks of the season. Now, time is on the Royals' side. Health is not. And that has been a direct impact of this 6-game losing streak. Hopefully they can try to break that skid tonight, as Brady Singer will be taking the bump against Tanner Bybee of the Cleveland Guardians. They will hope to avoid losing the series on just Tuesday of this 3-game set. First pitch will be a little bit later on at, I want to say 6:40 then. Yeah, 6:40, a little bit earlier because those September earlier start times. Gets darker earlier. It's going to be nice and cool tonight. Playoff baseball is almost here. Hopefully the Royals can hang on to their playoff spot. We'll take our first break of the show. When we come back, let's talk more about that impact of losing Vinnie Pasquantino, probably for the rest of the season. We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to one of the sponsors today in Gametime. There's going to be a long homestand this week, one of the most important weeks, in my opinion, at Truman Sports Complex in a long time, decade plus for sure, because the Chiefs will be opening up on Thursday night, and the Royals are in the middle of a playoff and a division battle with 2 division rivals here in Kansas City for the week. You'll got Cleveland for 2 more, then you'll have Minnesota over the weekend. And by the way, that Saturday night game against Minnesota going to be on Fox. But if you're thinking about going to one of these games, it was a great crowd yesterday. Hopefully great crowds the rest of the week as this team is in a playoff battle. I can't wait to see what the turnout would be. But yeah, if you're thinking about it, go over to Gametime, buy your tickets, whether you're going by yourself, you're going with multiple people. That's the app that I use when I go to buy tickets, not just for sporting events, but for any type of event. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Again, that is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase with Gametime. We talked a lot about Vinnie Pasquantino in the opening parts of today's show, and it's hard not to, lean directly into that for today's show. That's been the talking point for the last 5 to 6 days. I mean, you go back to Wednesday night, wasn't it? Wednesday night, or maybe it was Tuesday night. Whatever the rain delay game was, which I think actually was Tuesday. Yeah, because Wednesday afternoon was the finale in Cleveland. They blew that game. And Thursday was when the Houston series began. So Tuesday night, which was 1 week ago today, the Royals had won in Cleveland. After that rain delay, they'd set down the last 15 Cleveland hitters to win that game after a 2+ hour delay. And they were tied for first place, and they held the tiebreaker. Wednesday goes around. Royals come out hot. Michael Massey leads off that game with a home run. Vinny has a home run. They're up 5-2 and need 9 more outs to have sole possession of first place. And a collapse happens. Michael Walker gets knocked around. Lucas Ursig gives up some soft contact, and they lose that game in Cleveland. That bled into Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and they had a chance to win that game on Thursday night. I was watching college football and the game itself on my laptop, and when that play happened with Lucas Ursig, I think even after it had hit his hand, I had this gutting feeling that he was going to throw the ball away. I think it was the scramble. The crowd was getting loud. He's running down the first base line. It actually rolled away further than I thought it had. When it first glanced off him, I thought it was right there at his feet, but he had to go chase it down a little bit. His hands ringing, numb, probably throws it away. Vinny gets hurt. It was the worst possible thing that could have happened. The Astros take the lead, and you lose 2 players that both have to exit from that same moment. And right after that, it was just that sense of dread of that didn't look good at all for Vinny. The fact that he took himself out of the game. It wasn't like they came out there like when Bobby got hit in Cleveland. They're pressing on his hand, seeing if there's any pain there, see if there's a break, and he stays in the game. It wasn't like that. Vinny goes down in the heap, clearly in visible pain, and he takes himself out. Now, Lucas Ursig was different. Doesn't look like Lucas Ursig's going on the IL. They're just waiting for the swelling to go down a little bit, and he should be back hopefully sometime soon. But for Vinny, to me, that looked like it was going to be a permanent IL stint. And it's unfortunate for him because all 3 of his professional seasons in Kansas City have been cut short by injury. He said that he's not viewing this as a season ender. And you want to hear that from a guy who's optimistic. And it's awful that he had to go through that in a play that could have been avoided, where Lucas Ursig either lets that go or fields it cleanly and makes a strike to first. But it's just the sport. Those injuries can happen, and he can be optimistic. But the timeline of return, 6 to 8 weeks, 6 being optimistic, that's still the Royals advancing in the postseason. 8 weeks, I think, would be the end of the ALCS. So I think 6 weeks is right up there at the ALCS. That's tough to make a definitive answer on somebody's season. He's hopeful because he thinks the Royals are going to go far. And I think that's the hope in everybody's mind. I think you just have to go throughout the rest of this season not expecting him to be back, not trying to make decisions based on, oh, he's going to return at some point, because that's assuming everything goes smoothly, whether he gets surgery or not, rehab process goes well, and he's ready to go and play in playoff action in cold weather after 6 to 8 weeks. But you could tell on Friday night, Saturday, Sunday afternoon, yesterday, there's just this dark cloud that wasn't there when the Royals weren't playing well. I thought he was a huge reason, and this team being able to flush bad losses. Wednesday afternoon was a bad loss. Thursday evening, was a bad loss. Saturday was a bad loss because of how good Cole Reagans had looked, setting the Royals record for 8 consecutive strikeouts, and he had 10 Ks through 5, and things unraveled in the 6th inning. That didn't really happen all season long. No, Seth Lugo pitched well enough on Friday. They blow that game after Paul DeJong ties it with a 2-run home run. I'm not going to doubt this team. If you were looking for me to say that any point this weekend, I'm not going to. Okay, there are people out there that believe the season is over, and I just not going to view it this late in the season. I don't believe the guys that have been out there all year. I don't believe the coaching staff that has been out there all year putting this team in this position, deserves that type of treatment of now I'm bailing on the team because of an injury. Now, I can't sit here and say to you the confidence level and a playoff run is the exact same from when Vinnie was there to where Vinnie is now. I would be lying to all of you, and that's not fair to those that listen. But with a 4.5, 5-game cushion in the playoff race with 23 games to go, still hopeful, still optimistic, and playoff odds would indicate that the Royals are going to get to October. And you can hope they can snap this skid and don't let it balloon to 10 or 11 games. But right now it's at 6. They win one tonight. Maybe they can win tomorrow. You're not really panicking about that playoff spot anymore. And maybe the hope is back on for an AL Central race. But I don't think Vinny would want the fan base to just give up on all these other players that had gotten them to this point. Vinny was a huge part of this team being where they were at, to get back to first place, to have one of the best odds to make the postseason on the American League side. Hell, all of baseball for that matter. But one thing I wanted to wait to talk about until I had a chance to do it on a podcast was that as good as Vinny was, and you can't replace RBI production, you can't replace hitters with runners in scoring position, you can't replace the overall presence of Vinnie Pasquantino. From a baseball perspective, the Royals are very fortunate that Salvador Perez can give them that type of offensive production and, let's be honest, interchangeable defense at first base. I think Salvi and Vinny are not far off in terms of how they play first base. And I know Vinny was pretty good to start the year. He had struggled defensively, and I don't think Salvi's a Gold Glover there. I don't think Vinny's a Gold Glover over there. So it's fortunate that the Royals could plug a first baseman over there. And I know they brought in Yuli Gurriel, who can play first base. And I thought that he was good in the 2 games the Royals had him for, and who knows how long he's going to be out with that hamstring tightness. The other positive is they're very fortunate Freddie Fermin is their backup catcher. Freddie Fermin is better defensively behind the plate in a lot of different areas than Salvador Perez is. Offensively, he's been very good this year. So that was, if you were going to lose somebody, and a key top player, you're including rotation, you're including bullpen, you're including the lineup, right? Losing Vinny or Salvi, the Royals had that ability to replace them with somebody that's not a D- player. That's a clear scrap heap player. Freddie Fermin could start for a lot of teams, and he goes behind the plate. Salvador Perez would start for every team in baseball, whether it's at catcher or first base. He would be out there because of his bat alone. And the Royals were very lucky to have that type of shift. They go out there and add 3 guys to help the lineup a little bit. Tommy Pham, Robbie Grossman, Yuli Gurriel. They had those guys to really just piece together this final run. But that's what I wanted to put out there. And I could have put it out there before we knew the extent of Vinny's injury. I'm glad Freddie Fermin gets the opportunity. I don't like this is how the opportunity came about. But the Royals are blessed with the ability to have good backups and to go out there and add more bench bats and guys that can start to make up for the production of Vinny. Again, you can't make up the RBI production. You can't make up the runners in scoring position. But a lot of things that Vinny did well over at first base or in the lineup, Salvi can do that at first base. Yuli Gurriel can't, but it gives Salvi the flexibility to also go behind the plate so you're not overexposing Freddie Fermin. Freddie Fermin can fill in just nicely when Salvi is over at first base. So that was the good part about it. However, the Royals have lost every single game that Vinnie Pasquantino has not been in since the injury. And they lost the game that he got hurt in. So you can call that, 5 straight, right? 5 straight losses since the injury. And they are running out of time to really make a push at the division. The good thing is they've got some guys that can at least piece together that production. Not completely. They're not going to get everything back with what Vinny gave them. But there are good players that can step in, Freddie Fermin being one of them, and the 3 guys they brought in off the waiver wire. Okay, before we move on to our final segment, we want to thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On MLB podcast, as host Pat Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, is here daily to provide national expertise with his trademark humor to help you get ready for the MLB playoffs here in the dog days of summer. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day on Locked On MLB, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, the Royals are in a tailspin, but nobody else is really doing a lot about it. We'll tell you all about that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our final sponsor today in FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. And if you're feeling like the Royals can snap the skid tonight, Brady Singer's looked really good of late. He was fantastic in Houston. Maybe you want to put some money down on Kansas City winning tonight, or for somebody to break out of a slump. Bobby Witt Jr. is due. I would probably sprinkle in a little bit of money on the over for a hit total tonight for Bobby Witt Jr., but do so over at FanDuel. When I was driving back last night from being out of town and was gone for the majority of Labor Day weekend, didn't really have the chance to give you guys my thoughts on the Astros series, on the loss yesterday to Cleveland. Had a chance to catch the first 2 to 3 innings of that game, but was driving and didn't really have the chance, and I was out of range to be able to listen on the radio, so didn't really have a chance to catch all of that game, or at least visually see that game. And not to worry, didn't have an episode last night. We're giving you 5 episodes this week. Not sure yet if I'm going to double up one of the days, kind of depends on schedule, or if I'm going to do one over the weekend. All kind of depends on work schedule and also what the Royals are doing. If there's enough to do 2 episodes in one day, which shouldn't be too hard considering they're in a playoff push in the final 20-ish games of the season. If you are somebody today that needs to feel a sense of hope, a sense of optimism, because the Royals are not giving you that right now because of the injuries, because of the losing streak, I don't blame you. It was hard when I was seeing all the numbers roll into the Houston series and seeing yesterday's game. It is no surprise to anybody that the Royals are, doing this in the aftermath of an injury. I don't think it's that much of a surprise, because when a player like that goes down, it is going to have more of a drastic impact than just the production. There's the team morale, and the Royals are very good at flushing things, but that's one thing that's really hard to flush, of losing a guy maybe for the entire year, and a guy as important as Vinnie Pasquantino. From a baseball standings perspective, the Royals are still okay. They still are fine. And the way I am viewing these final 3 weeks of the season is not the Royals going on a tear and taking the division. I'm just not. Not with the injuries that have happened, not with the way they've been playing. I am just looking at the calendar and counting down the days at this point. And every win the Royals can muster in these final 22, 23 games is important for that cushion. I mean, Boston right now is in New York against a Mets team that is fighting for that final playoff spot. So the Mets are going to be packed with their fans at Citi Field. They are going to have everything on the line. Boston's been crumbling in the second half, so they are our team that I don't envision completely putting it together, now with that bullpen. Detroit had been maybe the hottest wild card team over the last month or two. They've got a great rotation. They've got a bad offense, and they get shut out in San Diego last night. They've got a few more games at Petco Park, a Padres team that is damn good and has, in my opinion, the best bullpen in all of baseball of the pure talent they have out there. I look at somebody like Seattle, kind of like Detroit, great rotation, bad offense. And you are asking those teams to capitalize on what the Royals are doing. And the Royals are experiencing their worst stretch of the season. There is no denying it. 6 straight losses. They have been swept in that stretch. They have blown multiple games. This is their ugliest and worst stretch, bullpen-wise. I think mainly offensively, because there's been some worse stretches for that bullpen. But offensively, I think it's obvious that when Bobby Witt Jr. doesn't hit well, this is what it looks like. This is exactly the way the offense looked when they got swept against the Rangers. And hopefully things can change a little bit tonight or maybe in tomorrow's game. I'm not necessarily looking at, you got to take this series. It's a must win here or there. At this point, I'm scoreboard watching elsewhere. Because as long as those teams are losing, the Royals are going to be fine. Now, if the Royals lost tonight, it gets to 7 straight losses. It's possible. I mean, the Guardians have the race on the bump in Tanner Bybee. And the Royals don't have Cole Reagans out there or Seth Lugo out there. And their offense is not really hitting with their hair on fire. They haven't been great with runners in scoring position. All those things combined, it wouldn't surprise me if they lost tonight. But if Boston and Detroit and Seattle keep losing, that 4.5 game cushion eventually becomes insurmountable with the time that they have left. I mean, the Royals are in a bad spot, and I think you might have woke up this morning and went, tonight's game I'm not as fired up for. The Royals are playing poorly. I'm already preparing myself for the collapse to reach a new low of 10 straight losses, 12 straight losses. And I'm not going to say that's impossible because anything is possible in baseball. But I would look at Boston, Detroit, Seattle. All of those games for them are must-wins because they can't get to 14 games left and be 4.5 back. They're not mathematically eliminated, but it's hard to erase that. Because if they go win tonight, well, it also means the Royals have to lose to keep gaining ground. And a 4.5 game cushion is a lot larger than you may think it is. And keep in mind, the Royals have lost 6 straight and barely lost any ground in the wild card race. They've lost a ton of ground in the American League Central race. They've lost 4.5 games in 1 week. And that's a large total here. And if they lose tonight, I would just put a ribbon on the American League Central and not have the Royals' name written on it. Because 5.5 back, if I'm going to talk about a 4.5 game cushion on the wild card race, I'm not going to act like a 5.5 game race with one more game against Cleveland on the schedule doable to me. I'm focusing on just getting into the postseason at that point in time. But time is running out for those teams chasing them. It's simply put, time is running out on them. And they can't keep losing these games, even to good teams, and not capitalizing what the Royals have done. They've been waiting for the Royals to have a stretch like this for the entire year. And it's taken until September for them to do it. Now, the Royals can make everybody feel a lot more comfortable if they can get back up on the horse. But as I said, there's 8 games to go. 2 more against Cleveland. There are a few more against New York, or maybe is there 4 against New York? Might be a 4-game series against the Yankees. I would need to go double check on that because I think there's 9 games left in the gauntlet. Then they've got the Pirates. They've got the Nationals. They've got the Giants. 3 teams right there, Detroit as well, that they can have their number against. They can survive this gauntlet and get out with a 3.5, 4.5 game lead. They're going to be fine when it's all said and done. But they've got to survive these final 9 games, and the rest of those teams have to keep losing. But there's no denying the definition of where the Tigers, Mariners, and Red Sox are at is that time is running out on them. There's not many more opportunities to gain ground on the Royals because none of those teams, except for the Tigers, played Kansas City, and that series, is at Kauffman Stadium. So we'll see if the Royals can get back up on the horse tonight against Cleveland in Game 2. 6:40 first pitch, Brady Singer against Tanner Bybee. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. You can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On MLB podcast. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. And you can find the link to Locked On MLB in the description so you don't need to search it. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Tomorrow, we're going to talk a little bit more about what this lineup can give the Royals without Vinnie Pasquantino, especially deep dives on Tommy Pham, Robbie Grossman, and Yuli Gurriel. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.